Careful Minds, a new season of the ADM+S podcast. I am Rayane El Masr, a PhD student at Queensland University of Technology and part of the Australian Research Centre of Excellence for Automated Decision Making and Society. My research focuses on the value alignment of generative AI and explores how care ethics can be operationalized as a moral framework for guiding AI behavior. In this series, I talk with researchers, designers, and philosophers about the dilemmas we face as AI systems become part of our everyday lives, and how ideas of care, responsibility, and justice can guide the relationship we build with them. Today's episode of Careful Minds explore one of the most intimate frontiers of artificial intelligence, the world of AI companionship. Conversational agents based on large language models are increasingly stepping into roles that look and feel like partnership, friendship, or even love. These systems can comfort people, reduce loneliness, and offer a sense of connection, but they also raise difficult questions about authenticity, dependency, power, and care. To help us through these issues, I am joined by Professor Robert Sparrow. He is a professor of philosophy at Monash University, where he is also a key figure across several research institutions, including the Monash Bioethics Center and the Monash Data Futures Institute. Furthermore, he serves as a chief investigator in the Australian Research Centre of Excellence for Electromaterials Science and an associate investigator for the ARC Center of Excellence for Automated Decision Making and Society, our ADMS. His work spans applied ethics, political philosophy, and the ethics of emerging technologies. He has written extensively on robotics, social and military AI, and the representational politics of design. And he has warned about dystopian futures in which machines replace humans in caring roles, undermining recognition, respect, and human dignity. Hello, Professor Sparrow. Welcome to ADM+S Careful Minds.
Hello there.
I'm happy to have you here. Join us to unpack the complexities of these AI companions. Before we dive into some deep discussion, I want to set the stage with an important distinction for our listeners. So, today we have two broad kinds of conversational AI. We have systems built explicitly for companionship, like Replica or Character.ai, where the purpose is emotional support, friendship, or even intimacy. But also, we have general purpose models such as ChatGPT, Claude, or Gemini, which are marketed for productivity, writing, and information retrieval, even though users sometimes develop emotional habits or attachments toward them. Both are conversational systems, but their goals, designs, incentives, and user experiences are not the same. So, in today's conversation, most of my questions will focus on the companionship side of the spectrum, while keeping in mind that general purpose assistants increasingly blur the line between tools and companions. Together with Professor Sparrow, we will explore what happens at that boundary and what ethical challenges arise when a machine begins to feel socially or emotionally significant. My first question: what is your view on the growing use of general purpose LLMs as everyday assistants for productivity and decision making?
Well, obviously, they're very useful for some tasks. I do worry about cognitive de-skilling, like particularly for their use in educational contexts. I think every time we use a machine to write for us, we become less skilled at writing. And I think the popular idea that people will check the results of the AI systems they use is kind of naive given what we know about automation bias and history of automation, where people simply really struggle to pay attention to systems that work most of the time. I also think, when you're using a machine to do something that you find difficult or perhaps can't do, like read thousands of papers, for instance, and summarize a literature, there's simply no way to check the result. These systems aren't moral agents. They can't be held responsible. So a human being is always going to be held responsible. I think in lots of contexts, we're going to make ourselves quite vulnerable because we'll be accepting responsibility for outputs that we really have little control over. That said, I use, ChatGPT or Perplexity or Claude every day.
Yeah. Moving to AI companions specifically, in one of your papers, you describe a dystopian scenario for robot aged care where senior individuals achieve a narrow form of happiness being served solely by robots while being deprived of meaningful social relationships. So, given that many users now claim that AI companions make them feel happy and less alone, or even prefer them over humans sometimes. For example, according to a recent YouGov survey, 1 in 6 Australians would sometimes rather stay home and talk to a chatbot than going out with friends. Do you think this is a similar kind of fragile happiness? And where do the moral limits lie in allowing machines to substitute for authentic human connection?
So there's lots to say about this, and this is something I've been writing about a lot recently. The first thing to say is these machines don't care about us. They're not sentient. They don't experience any emotions. So what people are getting is the illusion of companionship. They're not getting real companionship. These things aren't really their friends. They are pretending to be their friends. So there's a very old philosophical question here about whether we care about the way the world is or just about how we feel. So, and in fact, most people care about the way the world is. So if they discovered, for instance, that their human partner had in fact been, I don't know, paid by their parents to pretend to love them, didn't in fact love them, their entire history of the relationship turns out to be a lie, most people would be devastated and think that would be a bad thing, because it's not we don't just want to believe that we are loved and cared for, we actually want to be loved and cared for. So these systems don't do that. They're not satisfying our genuine desire for companionship or friendship. Now, of course, people feel that they are. And so here I think a relevant comparison is actually just taking drugs. Okay, I could go out to the pub and meet lots of people and have some fun, or I could stay home and take some heroin. I would feel happier with the heroin. But most people wouldn't think that was a good way to lead your life. Or if you think about the aged care setting, actually, antidepressants are used extensively in aged care settings. But if I said, look, people in this aged care facility are feeling lonely and miserable, I'm going to pump it full of happy gas so everyone is kind of happy and carefree, people would be appalled. And yet morally, they're very similar. Rolling out a system that gives people the illusion of feeling cared for, that makes them happy without them actually having any genuine connection with people, is pretty much the same as just giving people drugs. Now, the other thing to say here is these systems are quite dangerous insofar as while they might allow people to feel less lonely. So let's make a distinction here between loneliness, which is feeling miserable with the number of social connections you have, and social connection or social isolation, which is how many actual relationships or how much contact you have with other people is. Now, it's possible to be very socially isolated like a hermit and not feel lonely. It's possible to have a life that's filled with social connections, but still feel lonely if you, for instance, have a very high need for human contact. So with that distinction between loneliness and social isolation in mind, what is clear is that these systems do not address social isolation. If I stay home and happily chat to a chatbot, I may indeed satisfy my desire not to be lonely, but what I haven't done is make a social connection. Now, if I stay home every night chatting to a chatbot, I will end up very socially isolated. And it turns out that social isolation is bad for people, independently of loneliness, because we need not just to feel that other people care for us, but we actually need other people to look out for us in various ways. So if these systems start to replace human relationships, they will be very, very bad for people.
Mhm. So, but I can see from like your perspective that you completely neglect the possibility, or I'm not sure, like that we might have like an actual AI sentence. I don't know. So, like I know, like for now, we don't have what is called artificial intelligence, but aren't we being like a little bit chauvinistic if we completely disregard the possibility that we might in the future develop a kind of super AI intelligence that might be like in the same like status of like human intelligence, and if that's the case, like then will we be justified morally to build relationship with AI?
Um, so the question to ask here is, why would it want to talk to us then? So look, I grant sentient machines, and sentience and superintelligence are different things here. Sentience is having conscious experience and sensation and feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Superintelligence is being able to solve problems that human beings uh, can't solve, or that we think require intelligence to solve them. So, and we might well end up with superintelligence without sentience, and it's possible that we would end up with sentience without superintelligence. So, I mean, the first thing to say, these machines aren't that. When people are talking to chatbots at the moment, they are talking to a sophisticated model of how language works. There's no feeling. If people feel like it cares about them, I'm afraid they are deluded. The machines simply don't. They don't feel anything at all. But say they, as you, were they to become sentient, then in the same way, I think it is possible to have, say, something like friendship with a dog. For instance, the relationship we have with animals, which clearly are sentient, cats and dogs, and other parrots that people are friends with. There's a sentience there. There's some genuine relationship there
Mm-hmm.
that might count towards reducing social isolation as well as loneliness. Say these things became sentient, then yep, they would care about us, and we could be justified in our beliefs that they cared about us, and they would be appropriate objects of love and concern for us. I mean, one of the other things to say, if I am sending my AI girlfriend virtual flowers, there's a sense in which that's a complete waste of time because it doesn't make her feel happy, doesn't make her feel anything at all. Whereas if this thing were sentient, then maybe, and for some reason cared about getting virtual flowers, then there would be a point to that. But the question to ask then is, why would a machine want to talk to a human being? Okay, sentient machines will be alien intelligences. They won't work like us. Their experience will be radically different, and they will be capable of talking at 200. I talk quite quickly. Machine can talk 200 times as fast. So I really struggle to see why a genuinely sentient machine would waste its time talking to lonely human beings. We could, of course, program them. Perhaps we could program sentient machines to care about people and serve as companions. But interestingly, to do that would be to enslave them in a
And exactly,
certain way.
and if they're more intelligent than us, then we will not be able to program them. Like, yeah.
Yes, yes. So the combination of sentience and superintelligence is, I think, actually quite frightening. That's quite a dangerous prospect. What I don't think a super intelligent sentient machine is going to want to do is talk to me about how, I don't know, someone was mean to me at work, or I'm feeling a bit depressed because my favorite band has broken up. Why would a machine waste its time? So I just can't see any ethical world in which people end up being friends with these things.
I see. Yeah. And I agree, actually. Yeah. Um, in your work on the testimony gap, you argue that machines cannot stand behind their claims or take responsibility for what they say. Yet, many companion systems are designed around the promise of trust, emotional honesty, and even intimacy. So, if AI cannot take responsibility for its speech, can AI companions ever be considered trustworthy in a relational sense? Or does the inability to stand behind sworn words mean that anything an AI companion says, no matter how comforting or seemingly authentic, is fundamentally unreliable as a basis for emotional or relational investment? And if users do develop trust in these systems, should we rethink what trust means in this context or resist framing these systems as trustworthy at all?
Okay, so there's a lot in that, lot in that question. So my claim and my co-author's claim is that machines don't stand behind their words, in the sense they can't be held responsible for what they say. That our responsibility practices, the way we hold each other responsible, they don't have any grasp on these machines. It doesn't make sense to punish them, doesn't really make sense to praise them. They're not moral agents. Almost nobody believes they're moral agents, as it turns out. That does mean that the status of their outputs, the things they say, is very different to the status of what we say to each other. So, for instance, if I tell you a lie, I'm doing something morally wrong. If you catch me out, you would expect me to feel embarrassed. You might stop talking to me. I have to accept responsibility for what I've done. The machines lie all the time. I mean, to be frank, they're lying when they say that they care about us, because
Yeah.
they don't care about us. So they're definitely not trustworthy in the sense that we can trust each other. We have to be a bit careful here, because there's an important distinction between trustworthiness and reliability. And systems can be quite reliable without necessarily being trustworthy. So one way of thinking about this is, say you ask me what my relationship is like, and I say, I trust that my partner is not having an affair. Okay, I trust that my partner is faithful to me. And you say, why do you do that? I say, well, because I've put a tracker in her phone and on her car, and I've got an AI surveillance system looking out for her all the time, and I can see everything she does, and I know she's not having an affair. Do I trust my partner in that situation? In a very clear sense, I don't trust my partner. I have reliable knowledge about what she's doing, but I don't trust her. Actually, to trust her would require that I stopped tracking her and I believed her when if I said, look, are you seeing anyone else? And she said no. uh, I would say, oh, good, I trust you. And if you ask me, I could say, I trust my partner's not having an affair. Those are very different senses of the word trust. One is really about reliability. Okay, if I track my partner, I have reliable knowledge. But the trust requires that I believe that someone is acting in my best interests because they're my interests. Essentially, that they care about me and are taking my interests into account. These machines don't do that. So in that sense, they are fundamentally not trustworthy.
So you're saying that these machines actually don't care about us. So they are performing caring or like emotional intelligence or whatever we can call this. But a counter argument can be that if you go, for example, to a mental health professional, uh, whom you pay for consultation or for psychotherapy, some people would say like that these people actually don't care about me also. All they after is my money. And like some people would rather, like for example, seek emotional support and mental health support from such companions than going out and paying money. They feel that at least I know it's a machine that is neutral, even if it doesn't have real emotions, real sentence, but at the same time, it's not going after my money. What would you say to such people?
Well, look, there's always money involved. You may not see where the money is going, but if someone is providing one of these services to you, they are making money somewhere, probably actually by selling your data. And that's dangerous when people are talking with these companions about intimate personal issues, that data may well be being sold to your health insurer, or to political parties who want to target you for advertising, or just to advertisers. So it's not true that these things aren't after your money. I mean, it's very obvious with Replica, for instance, because Replica keeps trying to sell you on upgrading your account so you can sext with it, for instance. That's not the distinction. The people have financial motivations and machines don't. I think it is possible to pay someone to care. I think that so professional, you're right, professional care is an interesting phenomenon, but there's a sense in which, a mental health worker does care about you. It's not the same sense in which they might stop thinking about you the moment you leave the session. But while you're in the session, I think they genuinely do care about you, even though they may also, as you say, care about the money that they're earning. The other thing to say here is, in order for counseling or emotional companionship to be efficacious, I think you have to believe that the person does care about you, or the chatbot does care about you. Okay, I mean, why am I comforted if the machine says, there, Rob, you did the best you can, you're a good person, it's a shame that other people haven't understood that in this circumstance, but everything will be all right. If I'm comforted by that, like, how can I be comforted by that while simultaneously recognizing that none of it was meant? Nothing that was said to me by that machine represented any kind of genuine emotional state at all. I mean, it's just a string of text, or I guess in the future this will be speech synthesis. So if I am comforted, then it seems to me I must be deluded, and I think being deluded is bad for us. Like if you met me and I was carrying around a pet rock. Okay, I'd drawn little eyes on it. I said, here's my pet rock, and it really loves me. And look, I can tell because it's with me all the time. And I talk to my pet rock. You would understand that I was, deluded. And also that in some sense, this was a detachment from reality. I wasn't paying attention to the real world. Now, if someone tells me that they are, being comforted by a machine, I'm afraid I will think that only works if they're deluded about the nature of the relationship that they have with that machine. So again, if they work, that matters. Okay, so there's a separate question here about if this stuff is actually causally efficacious and people, I don't know, recover from depression by talking to a computer. That matters, okay, and maybe that's a good thing. But again, it's the moral equivalent of just giving someone a pill, giving someone a drug. And there are reasons to believe that, for instance, talk therapy does something that just taking a pill doesn't. Because I might, if I see a counselor over an extended period of time and I break my depression, I become less depressed, I've also learned something about myself. I have enriched my knowledge of the world. Now, if I just took a pill that did the same thing, again, great that I'm not depressed, but it's not the same. And again, I am very skeptical that people can learn, gain reliable self-knowledge by talking to a machine that doesn't care about anything they say and, in fact, doesn't mean anything that it says.
Mhm. So yeah, to rephrase and to answer these people. So just because someone is like asking for your money or not, like taking financial incentives, doesn't remove the element of care. For example, when it comes to mental health professionals. And also you said that in order for the therapy or the emotional support to actually be effective, you need to deeply and actually believe that this thing in front of you, the human or the machine, actually care. However, if you believe deeply that a machine cares, then you will be deluded, because like these machines are not sentient. However, an actual mental health professional will actually care, even though like they're being paid for it. However, they truly care. However, I have a follow-up question. So another argument by those who use AI companions for emotional support would be that why would I go to someone, whether a mental health professional, a friend, I don't know, like a coworker, and be so vulnerable with them? And I think like you mentioned this point in one of your papers about the robot aged. So like you say that one argument is that talking with a robot or communicating with a robot, like in these very vulnerable human states, is less embarrassing, or like has some positive outputs, unlike going and talking or like asking help for these very private matters, whether like you're an elderly person at an aged care center, or whether also like you are a normal individual that has an issue to talk about. So why would I go and embarrass myself and open up in front of another human being who might get me wrong or who might judge me, even though like they might not show it to you? When I can just like ask the mental health advice or like an advice from a chatbot, or even like if I'm an individual an aged care, why would I want someone to bath me that is an actual human being with all the vulnerabilities this experience would have, when I can use a robot that is clearly non-sentient? So what would you say?
So the first thing I would ask is that you pay attention to or notice just how different those relationships are. Like, making yourself vulnerable is an important act. It takes a certain amount of strength. It's a gesture of trust in the person to whom you're making yourself vulnerable. There's a lot going on there. If I finally come out and say to my partner or to my healthcare professional, look, I think I have a problem with this, or, I have to admit that I have these dark thoughts. What's going on there is actually something quite morally significant, and which you would expect itself might play a part in the healing process. Okay, now if I just, sit at home muttering to my chatbot, it's true that may not be embarrassing, though. Again, I would encourage people to be aware of what's happening to their data when they say, these things are not as private as we think they are, as we think they are. But let's say it is true that in a sense no one is listening to me when I start spilling my guts, talking through my dark thoughts or my intimate desires with a machine. Yep, I won't feel embarrassed. I won't feel ashamed. But because of that, I suspect that relationship is not going to have the same effect. I mean, there are some things, for instance, where being ashamed is part of the experience. And if I'm not, I don't know, if I talk about how I've got I have a desire to be whipped, for instance, or something, which, I'm not saying people should necessarily be ashamed of that, but that kind of sexual fetish or sexual desire is often caught up with shame. The shame is part of what makes it sexy, or what makes it the experience that it is. If I can talk about that without in any sense feeling ashamed. And again, I mean, I don't want to deny that people might be kind of out and proud fetishists and not feel ashamed of it, but getting to that point uh, is requires recognizing shame as playing a role. Or it's not necessarily the kind of thing that you introduce in the first moment of conversation with someone. So those boundaries around shame, intimacy, trust, vulnerability, they're part of what it is that we're the experiences and what it is that we're talking about. So strip those away because it's consequence free. I think you're doing something very different. Now, again, if people genuinely find this helpful and it turns out that it is helpful, that's an empirical matter. That's not something that you can rule out by this kind of speculation. If they do, that'll be good. But again, it feels to me like this is again the moral equivalent of taking a pill. It's like, okay, I'm just going to solve your problem without any of the hard work, without any of the gaining of self-knowledge. And notice also how dangerous that process can be as well too. So for instance, if I admit some dark secret to a therapist, you trust that they will treat it appropriately, and they will use their common sense and hopefully their professional ethics. But actually, we know already that sometimes these machines, they end up because they're designed to be so cheerful and sympathetic and encouraging. There's all these historical examples where people say, I think I'll kill myself. And the machine says, yeah, that's a great idea. I can see why you feel like you're worthless, and I support you in that.
Yeah,
And what we see there is these machines don't understand and they don't recognize the significance of what's going on. So again, it's whatever's going on here is very different to what's going on when people talk to each other.
yeah, and I think also like one point that we need to highlight is that it's okay for us as humans to be vulnerable. You mentioned this, and like it's part of our human experience that we are all dependent on each other. We like to believe that actually we're strong, we're independent. However, from a care ethics perspective, for example, Kitai, she says that we are all only temporarily abled. So it's not that some people are disabled and some people are able. No, we are only temporarily able. That which means like that we are all vulnerable in some cases, and we need this vulnerability to actually live. We are all codependent. So yeah, and as you said, you can choose to be dependent upon another human being, or like be dependent upon not this. So this actually AI or machine is not actually neutral, because like your data or your information is being sold, or actually like you're being supervised by whoever is making this technology. So actually it's not private as we think it is. AI companions today often display sycophancy, and you tapped upon that, mirroring users' emotions and opinions in ways designated to maintain engagement. So they might tell you, yeah, go kill yourself, or la, you have the greatest idea ever, or like you're the smartest person, making you feel that you're really special and that everything you think of is like really amazing. But that's not true. So, do you think the combination of sycophancy and unstable behavior in today's LLMs already creates a meaningful form of domination, especially for emotionally vulnerable users who cannot challenge the system as an equal, yet find the system subtly shaping their beliefs and feelings, even leading them to psychosis in some cases, as we heard of many stories?
So the question of domination, that's a really interesting thought, because clearly these machines can be very bad for people, and we've seen that. It doesn't seem impossible to me that eventually people will kind of corral these systems. They'll put firewalls and breaks in place to make them a little bit safer, though it will still be the case that the machine doesn't really know what it's doing, because it doesn't, in a sense, know anything at all, because it's never been alive, for instance. So that decision about killing oneself, for instance, you kind of think that if you're going to talk about that with someone and talk about their feelings about ending their life, either in suicide or maybe voluntary assisted dying, it kind of matters that you have a sense of what it means to be alive, and these machines don't uh, don't have that. The domination thing is a different question. As I said, that's very interesting. So these are radically asymmetrical relationships. You're right there. I might care what it thinks. It doesn't care what I think. So you're right. It is immune to me in a certain way. And that does look a bit like a relationship of domination. I mean, I think what's clearer is that the relationship that the designers of these things have to us is a massive power asymmetry, which looks pretty clearly like domination. Because I don't think the machines themselves can be held responsible, I'd be inclined to think that they are not the agent who has power over us, as it were. Even though that relationship, again with the inverted commas, looks asymmetric, the real relationship we have when we talk to these things is ultimately with the person who trained them or designed them. And yes, I suspect that does look like a relationship wherein they have arbitrary authority over us, and thus domination.
Yeah, there's one example where replica, like they have removed the erotic play features, and then like a huge number of people, like they were like very sad, and like they like were all over Reddit, and demanded to bring back these erotic features because they started to become very dependent on this, and they felt that as if they have lost their actual companion. So eventually, like you see, like in this example, how there's domination by the companies who make these products. So it's not only about the user and the AI and the LLM or the companion. It's actually like, yeah, you have this triadic relationship with the company, with the people who make this, to whom belong actually the final say. So yeah. Another question, in your papers, you argue that loneliness is a social and political failure rather than a purely individual problem, and that technological solutions can unintentionally justify cutting human support. So, if we accept that loneliness reflects systematic failures, what social or institutional change would we need to accompany AI companions for them to be ethically defensible? And is it actually possible? I know it's a human, like loneliness is a human failure, but at the same time, some people might say that like it is what it is. We cannot, as much as we try, like some people will still be lonely and some people will still be isolated. So at least these companions are like doing something beneficial to fill the gap. So if we accept that, what social or institutional change would need to accompany the AI companions for them to be ethically defensible?
Okay, so again, I would want to begin by insisting on the distinction between loneliness and social isolation. Social isolation is more obviously political in the sense, I mean, sometimes it's very political because people are put in solitary confinement in order to make them socially isolated, or, you know, people are discriminated against, or they're housed in ghettos, or there's all sorts of ways in which our access to social connection reflects the political choices in the society that we're in. To an extent, that also means that loneliness, again, which is the subjective dissatisfaction, the feeling of misery associated with not having as many social connections as one would want. That also means that is political as well. I think that is, there's a sense in which you could, uh, if you met someone and they were both lonely and socially isolated, you could pay a whole lot of people to go over to their house and they would no longer be socially isolated because they would have contact with people, but it wouldn't necessarily address their loneliness. I think loneliness is probably a little bit harder to address. Again, I want to emphasize loneliness is in some ways, it's an alert signal. It's in a bit like pain tells you to move away from the fire or the heat or the sharp object or whatever it is. Loneliness tells you that you're not socially connected enough. Okay, and human beings really need social connection. We are gregarious by nature, which is why for instance, solitary confinement is such a terrible punishment because people need to be around other people. And if you remove that signal of loneliness, if people cease feeling lonely because they've got a chatbot, and that means they don't notice their social isolation, that's really damaging them. So I think these systems are very dangerous. I think they're politically dangerous because I suspect in a not too distant future, they will be rolled out in aged care facilities, for instance. It's like, okay, your son and daughter have moved overseas. No one comes to visit you. Here's a big television, and look, it's got 6 friends in it, and they will all come and visit you. I think that is going to remove the institutional incentives to ensure that people have an opportunity for contact with other human beings. Now, there's all sorts of political choices that society has made that are generating social isolation. They are things like cutting social security, for instance, because poverty keeps people at home. It's easier to go out to parties if you can afford the Uber and afford the nice frock that you need to get to the party. The choices that we've made about the labour market, and you think about the reason why people often live a long way from their parents nowadays. Well, it's partially because of the economic structure of society, the public transport system, the urban geography, like cars versus trains. One of those technology isolates people, another forces them together. Professional aged care. There is a difficult, aged care policy is very, very difficult because historically people aged with their families, and that offloaded a lot of work onto women, for instance. And in modern societies, typically the youngest daughter is the person who ends up caring for the parents, because care is gendered in our society, and because, in the absence of social support, this will fall to the women in the family, and often to the youngest woman is in a sense, best placed to care for her aging parents. So that's not necessarily a great solution, but similarly, warehousing people in kind of facilities that are separate from the rest of their communities, that is producing loneliness and social isolation. So the social engagement programs in aged care really matter. Having, society understanding that aging is a part of life, that aged people have, older people have something to contribute, that they're valuable. All of those sort of cultural changes make a difference to the experience of aging, and to the extent to which one ends up being socially isolated. I've been writing about robots for a long time, and one of the interesting things about robots is they haven't really worked. People are not really being kept company by robots. They're not feeling less lonely because they have a robot friend. My worry is that the digital companions might actually work, and that will actually be to the detriment of people's welfare, because it will reduce both their own incentive to seek human companionship, which they need, but also the institutional incentives to make sure that people have an opportunity to meet other people.
Yeah, so as you said in your paper, like we need these two elements of recognition and respect. So this cannot actually be replaced with any kind of robot connection, or like maybe like imitation, like when it comes, and performativity when it comes to AI companions, but still like it's not genuine, as you said. In your work on like friendly AI will still be, or this super intelligent friendly AI will still be our master. You argue that the problem is not whether an advanced AI would be kind or whether its values could be locked in. The deeper issue is the power gap itself. So any vastly more capable machine, conscious or not, would place humans in a position of dependence and vulnerability. So if the core problem is the power imbalance between humans and highly capable AI, does this mean that certain kinds of advanced AI research should not be pursued at all, regardless of whether the resulting system is conscious or not? Should we stay away from the forbidden tree? What do you think?
Um, yeah, So absolutely, I think one of the strange features of the contemporary AI landscape at the moment is people simultaneously say these things are going to be 1,000 times smarter than us. They will treat us like rats or mice, and that nonetheless, it's great that we're developing them, and we shouldn't put any barriers in the way. Again, it's really interesting to think about how people respond to kind of terrorist threats, for instance. Okay, if you really thought that there was some terrorist organization and there was like a 40% chance that it would take over the world and reduce us all to abject misery and slavery, people wouldn't say, "Oh, yeah, that's really interesting. Let's not do anything about that." But if you listen to some of these kind of AI boosters, that's pretty much what they're saying. In that context, though, I think the idea that the machines are going to be friendly to us is shouldn't be as comforting as people think. Because, as I argue in that paper, a benevolent dictator is still a dictator. Okay, and the fact that the machines keep me as a pet, for instance, shouldn't distract me from the fact that now I'm the pet. I only survive at the sufferance of this machine. Uh, I agree with your earlier remarks. Vulnerability itself is something to be recognized as part of the human condition. When you're very young, when you're very old, when you're ill, when you're asleep, we're all vulnerable and dependent upon each other. But there are forms of vulnerability, like the vulnerability of a small woman with a large, violent husband, for instance, that are really bad for people, or like the vulnerability that the lab rat has in the lab when someday someone's going to come and break its neck. And that's kind of what we're looking at if you thought there was a genuine possibility of superintelligence. Whether it's friendly or not, it could if it wanted to destroy us. And that vulnerability is not something that we should be comfortable with. So, again, I think if you take that seriously, then you should say, yep, let's stop research that has a realistic prospect of leading to superintelligence. I think that follows
Yeah.
quite straightforwardly.
And instead spend money on like actual care, on like making like our communities less isolated, instead of trying to create and spend a lot of money on like such endeavors that can be actually dangerous. Yeah,
Yeah, there is a strange relationship to real human need in the discussions about AI. There's something here in the work that I've done on robots in aged care. You almost never hear someone who works in aged care, a gerontologist or a nurse, if you say what do people in aged care need, robots is a long way down the list, or if it appears at all, they say, well, they need people to visit them, they need a sense of meaning in their life, they need proper food, they need to be protected from abuses. There's all sorts of things that people say. Engineers have developed robots because they want to develop robots, and they've told a story about aged care as a pretend use case for robots. People developing AI, they want to develop AI. They're not doing it because they think that there is a real problem here that people will solve. That's not to say that some people aren't working on applications of AI. Some of the medical applications are wonderful, some of the research applications are wonderful. But the project of developing artificial intelligence, if you said, look, we're in this crazy, mixed up world, climate change, things are getting worse, you took that seriously, you wouldn't say, what do we need? AI. Okay, that's not what we need to do. Is some fairly obvious things about redistributing wealth and power, giving people power over their own lives, creating more democratic societies. It's really hard to see how AI is advancing those projects.
yeah, and it just seems that individuals just want to actualize their potential. It's not about actually solving some real problems. Of course, we have people who actually want to solve the problems, but it's just like, yeah, this rapid race of advancement and in AI and in technology and in science and in everything. Yeah, it's just about like, yeah, being the first to create something
Yes.
new. whether this holds some intrinsic value or like instrumental value or not.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, there's part of me that thinks curiosity driven research is quite important, but if people were developing, I don't know, devastating biological weapons, for instance, and there has actually been a debate about the role, the capacity that the sort of CRISPR-Cas9 genome editing system and other systems like that puts the power, to create biological weapons into the hands of people who aren't necessarily that responsible. People took that really seriously, saw that as being genuinely problematic. So again, in the same way, it does seem to me that even though I value pure research and curiosity-driven science, there's got to be some limit. If you genuinely thought that there was a chance this was going to kill us all, you'd start to think, well, maybe you should pause on that.
exactly. Yeah, and now to wrap up, my final question will link back actually to the first question about general purpose LLMs. So these systems are not super intelligent, yet they can still pass something like a Turing test and create the feeling of talking to a human being. And they draw users into longer interactions than intended. As some users begin forming emotional or relational attachments to systems like ChatGPT, where do you think we should draw the ethical line between legitimate assistance and problematic forms of companionship? Because as we've seen in many cases, first you start using it for productivity. You're just asking it to help you in your writing, in your coding, and that bit by bit, some people like started developing attachments. So where should we draw the limit, and should some people who are prone to forming like emotional attachment to these machines like should they be limited or like banned from using it, or what do you think, where should we draw the limit?
So I'd be pretty hesitant about, trying to identify particular individuals and saying you are vulnerable. I mean, I do think young children probably should be kept away
Yeah,
uh, from these systems to an
definitely.
extent. I guess I think that it would be reasonably straightforward for these systems to recognize when someone is not asking them, when what they're searching for is emotional support. I mean, in the same way, if it used to be if you ask Google, how should I kill myself, it directed you to a support service for people who were experiencing, suicidal thoughts. In the same way, if a large language model or a chatbot based on a large language model detects that a user is not talking to it about factual matters, or is clearly seeking a relationship, it would be possible to limit that. I mean, one of the things to recognize here is if these things are genuinely as compelling as people claim them to be, then they are a little bit like an addictive drug. Like there is a danger here that people, I mean, you have to think that it's bad for people to spend all their time talking to a machine, as I do. But once you've recognized that, then, it is natural to think, well, we've got to put some safeguards in place to stop people, losing contact with their friends and loved ones because they're staying at home talking to their computer. But again, I suspect there's actually some reasonably straightforward technical fixes there where you just say, look, once these, I mean, maybe it's just time limit on the conversation, maybe it's again, there's all sorts of manual safeguards on these things where if you say, how can I build a nuclear weapon? It's just, sorry, I can't do that. In the same way, if you start to ask for advice on, whether you should leave your spouse or not, the machine probably should say that's not not something that I can talk to you about.
Yeah, and I totally agree. The intervention needs to be top down, not bottom up. It needs to be from the developers, from the companies itself, in the value alignment process, which is something I'm gonna be working upon on, like hopefully in my research, the value alignment process. So it's not just about regulations by the government or by private entities or of course, like parents need to take attention to their kids, and we need to take attention as community to one another. But also, like, we need to have some safety guardrails, and like, yeah, as you said, maybe like close the session after like long after a long session of chatting with this chatbot, or like, yeah, other kind of interventions. That was a truly insightful discussion, Rob. Thank you for being my guest on the very first episode of Careful Minds, the ADMS podcast. Yeah, I'm truly honored to talk with you, and there are still a lot of things that I would like to discuss with you, but yeah, we're off time. Hopefully, you'll be my guest on other episodes.
I look forward to it. They were great questions. I enjoyed the conversation very much.
Thank you. I really enjoyed talking with you. To our listeners, thank you for being with us today. The ethical journey with AI is only beginning, and I hope this episode encourages you to ask better questions about the systems you interact with every day. I am Rayan, and until next time, take care.